everyone. My name is Rebecca Giannini. I'm a parenting and relationship coach, and this is my group. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. And if you are looking to improve your relationships, if you are looking to stop generational patterns and replace them with healthy patterns, you're in the right place. Tonight, what we're going to be talking about is yelling and losing our marbles, losing our blank, losing our shit with people, whether that's a partner, whether that's a friend, a sibling, a parent, a child. If you are currently losing it with people, that means a couple of different things, and we're going to talk about what that means and how you can avoid that, and what you can do to regulate yourself and learn how to express your needs and establish boundaries, enforce boundaries while you're still in your green zone, so that you aren't harming your relationships by bottling up your needs and allowing people to disrespect your boundaries to the point where you lose it. And that is basically that is one of the things that so many families struggle with. I see a couple of you are here on live. I hope that you're here, Tanya. I know that you wanted to join. So hi, if you're here. I think that this is probably your first live, so welcome. So glad that you're here. So a lot of times what I see with families is that people stuff down their needs, and they, first of all, can't even identify what their needs are. They can't identify what their boundaries are, and therefore they can't enforce them until they lose it, until they have been, they've been denying that need for so long, till the point where they can no longer deny it. They're trying to be patient, they're trying to be kind or compassionate, but what they're doing is actually denying their own needs. And then what happens is their body and their brain gets so tired of doing that, and it sort of like swings back on the pendulum swings back. They get too frustrated for doing that for so long, and they have to then lash out. And that is a lot of times what's happening. So in order to avoid that, there are several things that we need to do. And there are also a couple of other factors that we'll talk about in the internal framework live that I'll be doing soon. So assuming this isn't related to an internal framework thing, which I'll briefly touch on tonight. I can just do that right now. So basically, some of us grew up in situations where yelling was modeled for us, yelling and blowing up was modeled for us, and then we sort of took that on as our communication style. If you've taken something on as your communication style or pattern, and you've accepted that as truth about yourself, about the way you communicate or what you're capable of, then we're also dealing with an internal framework struggle, and we need to deal with that piece separately. So for the purpose of this live, what we're going to talk about is just the behavioral pattern and not the internal framework piece behind it. And we will again talk about the internal framework in another live. So if you want to be part of that live, put that in the comments, and I'll make sure that you get tagged in that live. Internal framework is so important, so fundamental, but we can't talk about everything in every live. And so the point of this live is going to be about what we do about that behavior, how we escape that behavior, separate from the internal framework work that's related. So let's assume that you don't have an attachment to your framework. You don't have sort of the idea that this is part of me, this is who I am, I just can't talk to people without yelling. This is just part of who I am. I'm just a bad communicator. I'm just a yeller. I'm just a blank. Those would be examples of framework statements that indicate you might need to follow up and listen in on the internal framework live that I'll be doing. But assuming it's just like a pattern of behavior, and you're assuming like, oh, I try and enforce my boundaries with my kids or with my partner, and it doesn't work, nobody listens until I yell, then when I finally yell, somebody takes action, they start listening, so I keep yelling, right? If that's the place you're in, put that in the comments. Okay, Tanya, definitely I'll tag you. So if you're in the place where you feel like nobody listens to you until you start yelling, put that in the comments too. I want to make sure that I know who I'm talking to here on the lives. So if that's what you feel like you could say something a million times and no action is taken until you get to your boiling point, that is an indicator of poor boundaries. And it means that you probably have poor boundaries, and it means that you're modeling that for your kids. And that is not a dig. That is just, we were not modeled healthy boundaries growing up. So if you are consistently having to yell before your boundaries are respected, then there's a problem in not only naming them, but also enforcing them. Jen, you're saying that, yes, that's you. Okay, so you're feeling like nobody's listening until you yell. And so what that means is that we have a problem with enforcing the boundaries. So often what I see is parents will name the boundary, name the boundary, name the boundary, but they keep getting angrier and angrier each time they name the boundary. And so they're still not enforcing the boundary. They're still not requiring any action being taken. They're just providing information basically. And the information that they're providing gets angrier and angrier with each round. And what happens is your body has a harder and harder time regulating because you feel like, hey, I'm stating my boundary and nobody's listening. I'm stating my boundary and nobody's listening. So the feeling of disrespect keeps rising for you, and you move from your green zone to your yellow and eventually to your red zone, which is where you blow it, where you blow up on somebody and say things you don't mean, or you talk to somebody in a vicious voice, or you say, you start, doling out punishments and all of that stuff that you're looking back later and going, oh, I wish I hadn't have said that. I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish they would have just listened, right? So the problem is you're just stating a boundary, and then you are not taking action. So what happens when we have healthy boundaries is that we're in charge of enforcing our own boundaries. And yes, we want to name the boundary and be clear about that, but then we need to take action. We need to know what we're going to do when we name the boundary. So let's say, for example, I am, I have a 2-year-old in front of me or a 3-year-old in front of me who needs to, turn off media or needs to brush their teeth or whatever it happens to be. If I say to them, it's time to brush your teeth, and then I walk away expecting them to get to the bathroom and start brushing their teeth, that's not going to happen, right? Same thing with a 4 and 5-year-old, right? If you have a child who's self-sufficient enough to do that activity for themselves, that doesn't mean that you telling them will result in them doing that. So we want to be ready with an action we're going to take when they don't take action. So, and I think of my action when I'm still in my green zone. My green zone is I'm fully regulated. If I'm fully regulated, I'm okay. I'm doing fine. I am smooth sailing, just like you would pass through a green light. Green means go, right? Yellow zone is proceed with caution. It doesn't mean stop. It means pay close attention. Pay attention to your surroundings. Check in with your body. See how you're feeling. Red zone is I flipped my lid. I've lost it. So often what happens is people don't take action until they're in their red zone, until they flip their lid, and then they're doing all sorts of things that aren't kind. They're saying all sorts of things that aren't kind, and they're taking action in the wrong zone. So what we want to do is we want to start naming the boundary in green and coming up with our action, the action we're going to take after we name the boundary when we're still in our green zone. So we name the boundary once, and then we're ready to take action once. So we're eliminating that, naming the boundary, getting upset, naming the boundary, getting upset. So we're using all of that energy that we would be using on naming the boundary. We're using that to enforce the boundary. And so we're able to name and enforce the boundary while we're still in our green zone. And that's so important because in my green zone, I can think, okay, when my 4-year-old doesn't go to the bathroom and brush their teeth immediately, I'm going to walk over to him and I'm going to get down on his level and I'm going to help him say, hey buddy, it's time to go to the bathroom and brush our teeth. Let's go together. And I might pick him up, or I might walk I might lead him to the bathroom gently, or I might say, hey, should we hop to the bathroom like bunnies, or should we crawl like lions, right? I might have space to be playful because I'm still in my green zone. I've said it once, so I'm ready and available to enforce that in my green zone while I still have access to the part of my brain that could be playful, while I still have access to the part of my brain that's logical. So we want to pay attention. When am I taking action? Am I taking action in my green zone? Am I taking action in yellow, or am I taking action in red? And if you're finding that you're consistently taking action in the red zone, then of course you're, yelling quite a bit. So we want to start paying attention. How do I feel? And one of the things that I noticed is that so many people don't really have a well-developed green zone. They tend to live in yellow and red. And so they go back and forth between being like mildly frustrated all the time and then being really frustrated. And they keep going back and forth between yellow and red, never actually finding green. So green wasn't necessarily modeled for us. We didn't necessarily have parents who playfully thought of ways to get us to go to the bathroom. They told us one thing and then they smacked us, or they told us one thing and they yelled immediately because they expected, automatic obedience or whatever it was. So we didn't necessarily have good modeling for how do I enforce a boundary in my green zone. So we want to pay close attention. Do I have a green zone? Do I need to work on developing that? Do I need to, what does my yellow zone feel like? What does my red zone feel like? What are the physical sensations I have in my body in green, yellow, and red? So that's one of the first steps, is just start noticing. When I say a boundary, am I just giving information, or am I ready to take action? When I'm taking action, where am I? Am I in my green zone? Am I in my yellow zone? Am I in my red zone? And what do those zones feel like? Tanya says, yes, need better boundaries. Christina says, can you give an example with an older child? Yes. With chores or homework where you are maybe busy and not expecting to help with that activity? Yeah, great question. So, for example, let's say a 10 or 11-year-old, right? And you have, you're wanting them to get off media, for example. So, if you haven't been working on boundaries with them, then they might have the skill level of a 5 and 6-year-old when it comes to boundaries. So it's important to know that just because you have an older child doesn't necessarily mean that they have more skill in a specific area. So you, obviously they get things more quickly than a younger child does, but so you can teach them more quickly, but you're still going to have to take them through the same steps, right? So let's say the child is on media but mom, I really want 5 more minutes of this show. It's almost over, right? But you've already gone through the negotiations of, hey, 10 more minutes. Hey, after dinner, we're only going to have 10 minutes of media. But then there's still more negotiations. So some people get stuck in that negotiating place, trying this, and this is one of the pitfalls, is they get stuck in that negotiation place, trying to be respectful, trying to be patient, trying to be understanding, and they keep denying their own need. They keep denying their own boundary to the point that they lose it, right? And it would be better to say, you know what, I know that the show is, I know that there's only 5 minutes of the show, but we've already negotiated tonight, and it's really time for brushing teeth. Do you need me to help you turn off your media, or can you do it on your own? And it's better to do that than to keep trying to muscle out understanding when you're not really doing that. You're just denying your own boundary. So it's better to sort of stick to the boundary rather than that rising level of that feeling of disrespect. So it's also important to know that same child, especially if you guys need to work on boundaries, might be totally inflamed when you say no to that, because they're not used to you doing that. They're used to pushing and you acquiescing to the request, pushing and then you complying with the request, pushing. And so they're used to that that dynamic. And so when you hold the boundary, they're probably going to struggle to regulate. And when we are working on boundaries, it's important that we enforce them, we name them and enforce them in green, so that we have space to deal with their emotional reaction to the boundary. That's going to be part of this process. If you haven't had good boundaries, you are going to have situations where they come up against that boundary and they lose it, right? Because they're not used to that. They're used to getting a piece, getting a piece, getting a piece here, getting a piece here, and that's your way. That's their way too. So for you to introduce, this new way of drawing a boundary and then enforcing a boundary, you want to expect that you need to save some bandwidth to help them through that emotional storm. Does that make sense, Christina? Does anybody else have any questions for me? I have a couple of other things that I want to talk about, but I want to leave room for questions too. I try and keep these lives between 15-20 minutes when I can. So let's talk a little bit about emotional storms, and I do have a live on that topic. So if that as you're going through this and as you're realizing, okay, I need to start setting boundaries and then taking action more quickly, you want to prepare yourself for how to deal with those emotional storms. So one of the lives that I would go back and look at would be the live on reflective listening, because that is one of the quickest and easiest ways to de-escalate a conflict, and that is going to be a tool you want to have in your pocket 4 times just like this. When I say emotional storm, what I'm referring to is somebody struggling to regulate. They're in their red zone, right? So they had a full day at school. They had a hard time at practice. They didn't want to go to practice. They had to do homework, and now they get home and they want to watch just that 5 minutes more of that show, and they can't handle it. They can't handle that boundary being held. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold the boundary, right? We want to get ahead of those things and make sure that we have enough time to rest. And that's the topic of another live. Of course, we want to set up our lives in a way that we're less likely to lose it. But just because somebody is going to lose it when we hold a boundary doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold a boundary. We want to save the bandwidth that we're going to need to help them through that emotional storm, knowing that that's going to happen. And our job as parents or partners or whatever it is not to avoid conflicts with our loved ones. It's not to avoid conflicts at all costs. It's to move through conflict in a way that's healthy, to move through conflict and teach the skills needed to handle these conflicts in a way where everybody gets their needs met. So we're not trying to just avoid meltdowns, therefore giving into the constant requests. We're trying to make sure that everybody's needs are met. So one of the things that you want to focus on doing is checking in with yourself. What are my boundaries? What do I expect? Like, what does a respectful family environment look like for me? What am I, when I say this boundary, what's a respectful response? What would I expect from somebody who really cares about me and respects me? What kind of a response can I expect from them? So when I say, hey, it's time to turn off media, if I don't have an idea of how I expect them to respond, and I haven't communicated that idea to them in a meaningful way in my green zone, then they don't have a very good chance of offering that to me. So I might start it with, hey, I'm going to tell you something, and it might not be your favorite news. I have a message that I need to give you, and I need you to focus on your response. Here's what a respectful response is going to sound like. Okay, Mom. And then I want you to get up and do the thing I'm going to tell you to do. So I'm going to tell you that I'm going to tell you what time it is, and then what I want to hear from you is, I want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to say, okay, Mom, and then I want you to walk straight to the bathroom. Okay, I'm ready to give you the message. Are you ready? All right, sweetie. We've had enough media for today. We've already watched 2 shows, and it's time to get ready for bed. It's time to go to the bathroom and brush your teeth. And I remind them, take a breath. I know that you want more media, take a breath, and let's try the answer that I just showed you. Okay, Mom. And then we're gonna get up and go to the bathroom together. And you might literally need to model for them what you expect from them, because that's not going to come naturally to them either, because that's not what your pattern has modeled for them. So you want to set them up for success. They're not going to be able to give you a respectful answer if that answer hasn't been modeled for them explicitly. And you're going to have to do that several times before they can offer that to you. You're going to have to practice, just like any other skill. So those are the things I wanted to cover. Let me see, it looks like there's some more comments. Okay, wow, this is hitting the mark for our family. I love that. Awesome, Jen. Yes, thank you. It sounds like your question was answered, Christina. Sounds like starting with smaller stuff for new boundaries. Yes, that's a great point. So we want to practice in low stakes environments so that when we need the skill in high stakes environments, everybody has some familiarity with the skill. So I'm going to start practicing these boundaries when everything's fine, when we're okay, when it's really not a big deal, when we don't have a place to be in 20 minutes. I'm going to practice these skills when it really doesn't matter, when we're not on a time crunch, so that when these skills are necessary, when they come into play and we are in a time crunch, everybody's got some familiarity of how to navigate this situation. We always practice new skills in low stakes environments so that when we have high stakes environments come up, we're ready. Thank you for that question, Christina. All right, I don't see any more questions. I'm going to give you a couple seconds to put in any more questions before I hop off. If you have questions and you're watching this on the replay, please put them in the comments and I will get back to you. I will get back to you in the comment section or via DM private message if you prefer. One of the things that I want to be talking about soon is going to be the internal framework, which is directly related to this for a lot of families. A lot of families sort of have, especially parents, but this is true for couples and divorcing families too, right? We have these ideas of who we are, what we're capable of. We also have these ideas of who our kids are and what they're capable of. So we might have a child who's the stubborn one. We might have a child who is the one who picks a fight for everything. We might have the child who never listens, right? We might be the parent who just can't keep our crap together. We might be the parent who is always running late. We might be the parent who's always stressed before school, right? We have these ideas about who we are and we have these ideas about who our kids are, and that directly gets in the way of us making these changes, right? So if I am experiencing, and if all of my experience with one particular child has been, they're the one who fights me on everything, they're the one who never listens, right? If I have the years of experience with my children and that's who they are in my mind, then I'm seeing that when it's at play and also when it's not at play. So my brain will look for that in the environment even when it's not applicable, and it tosses out information that goes to the contrary. So we sort of get stuck seeing ourselves and seeing our kids in specific ways, and it can make it really hard when we're working on new skills. So that's a really important piece of this that we want to keep in mind, and I'll be talking about that. I'll probably do that next week, unless we have, a request from a member that's, that I see in the meantime. All right, I don't see any more comments. I hope you guys have a wonderful night. We've got some really exciting news tomorrow, so I can't wait to share it with you. We've got some really cool stuff brewing in the group and and I will share some more information tomorrow. All right, have a good night, and I will see you soon. All right, bye-bye.